Well, welcome back once again to Talking with Tech. This is Lucas Stuber, joined as always by Mr. Chris Begay. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm all right today. I'm all right.
You're just all right. I've never heard that answer from you. Gosh.
Usually I say fantastic, but today is the last day of school for me, and I'm kind of bummed. Most people are excited, but I have such a good time in my job. I like what I'm doing, so now I got to take a couple months off. That's
I knowing you, I think you'll find a way to stay busy. But I always had a post that last IEP, there'd be a celebration, and then it would be bittersweet for the week following, or hopefully 2 weeks or 3 weeks if I planned ahead, right? But
exactly. There's ways to keep interested.
And joined also by Rachel Madel down in LA. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm super jealous of Chris because I have to work all summer, so must be nice to have off.
The tribulations of private practice.
Exactly. But no, I'm wonderful. I'm really excited for today.
Well, so there's this new TV show actually on Netflix that with David Letterman, and the title of it is My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. And that's a little bit how I feel right now, because we are overjoyed to be joined by the one and only Carole Zangari. How are you?
Hey there. Just fine. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're thrilled. Congratulations, by the way, on the news of your ASHA fellowship that just came through. That's well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pretty excited. Very humbled.
That's great. It's very well deserved.
Thank you.
I guess one thing that I like to do with our guests starting off, and we're obviously particularly compelled in hearing your story, but is just to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to do what you do today.
Sure. Well, I have been a speech language pathologist my whole career and working with disabilities since I was probably an adolescent. And I think because I got into working with folks with disabilities in a very sort of hands-on practical way, kind of as a nurse's aide and a teacher's aide and a group home worker and all of that I always really kind of loved the practical side of things and really kind of felt the realness of what it takes to support somebody with a significant communication impairment. So I have had a pretty straightforward path to becoming a speech language pathologist. I did that right out of, I went to my undergrad program at University of Pittsburgh and did my master's at what's now the College of New Jersey. It used to be Trenton State College. And then I was maybe working for about a year when I really realized, my goodness, graduate school didn't prepare me for things the way I thought they might. When I realized I wasn't as well prepared as I thought I should be, I scraped up the money to go to my first ASHA convention. And there I met Marianne Romsky and Rose Sevchek. And they were wonderful helps to me and encouraged me to go back and do my doctoral study. So I was really fortunate to do that at a time where there was more funding for doctoral work. So I did that for a number of years and then stayed on at Purdue as a visiting assistant professor before my husband essentially said, give me palm trees. And then I came down to South Florida. And I've been at Nova Southeastern University for 23 years now, I think. And, they gave me the opportunity to build an AAC program. And so that's what we did. And I've been here ever since.
It's unusual even to have often, let alone to have the opportunity to build. A big part of what I know that you've done is sort of in this preparation of pre-service SLPs. Is that how have things shaped and evolved for you over the course of your 23 years at Nova?
For one, we moved into adding an online option for our graduate students. So that's been just tremendous for me, because getting to teach students who are all over the country, in addition to those that are on campus, has, just been wonderful. And I really excited about the possibility that online education has in AAC. I could talk all day just about that one thing, but they offered me the opportunity to build a program that had both coursework. So you're talking about the mid-90s, and there aren't that many programs now that require AAC courses, let alone then. So we developed the AAC course, and they made it required within a year. And then we developed a doctoral program, and so that has an AAC course. So there have been a lot of those kinds of opportunities.
Carole, can I jump in here and ask?
Sure.
I would imagine there are people that are currently either working in a university or are attending university that might be listening to this podcast. And they might be wondering, well, geez, how do we build something like that? Did they come to you? Did you go to them? What was the partnership like? And what were some advice you'd give people who want to build something like that?
Well, I think in my case, they came to me. I had done a presentation, I think at ASHA, that one of them, was attending and invited me to come and interview for a position. I think it is probably harder in today's climate because, the financial situation is so different for many of these programs, and the pressures are much greater. I think of all the things that students have to learn as beginning SLPs that, back in the day when I was studying to be a speech language pathologist, it wasn't even on the radar. So I think, there's so much more that is competing for students, attention. There's so many more areas that they have to be knowledgeable about, swallowing and reading and writing and transgender voices and, all of these kinds of things that we really didn't have to compete with, and now we really do. But I really do think that the secret is being passionate about something and investing in your own learning. So I think, if you bring that passion and just look for small opportunities and build from there, I think that's, one approach. I can tell you that, for example, with our AAC preschool that I ran for many years, I had no interest in doing anything like that. I mean, my plate was very, very full, but there really weren't options in the community to show how good AAC is done with little ones before they get to kindergarten. And I wanted my students to know how to do this. It's one thing to teach them how to provide clinical services within a room that's 10 by 10 feet, but when you are having to, deal with a classroom situation and all of the challenges of that, whether it's curriculum or behavior or pottying or whatever it is, right? It's just very, very different. But I thought if I could give them the vision of what could be, they could pull out little pieces of that and try to replicate that in the settings where they were working.
Well, so that is sort of tricky in my mind. I would imagine it to be tricky because of the different models that you could approach when you go into those settings. So, for instance, do you spend your time teaching a speech therapist to do a pre-service speech therapist? Do you ask them to learn about direct instruction, or do you teach them more about how to coach communication partners who are going to be working with the kids? Or is there some sort of delicate balance that you do of trying to do both?
It's a really good question, Chris, and I think they are both really important. But one of my personal philosophies is that you shouldn't ask other people to do things you're not able to do yourself or willing to do yourself. So I love to help them, get good at coaching and to influencing others and inspiring others and modeling for others. But before you get to that point, you better know what you're doing yourself. You better have made some of those mistakes on your own and feel comfortable and know what it's like when things fall apart and you've got to sweep it all back into a pile and see if there's anything you can pull out of that pile that would in any way make sense for the next.
Oh my gosh, those are the biggest learning experiences. Absolutely.
So I think I start with, from a pedagogical perspective, start with classroom learning, right? Because we're in grad school, so they have a required course. They might have taken one of, an elective course in AAC as well. But then in terms of their clinical application, I find it easier for that to be more on one-on-one basis. So let them, learn the basics of it in, a controlled environment before you start putting people in groups. And, just give them the opportunity to cut their teeth on some of the very, very pivotal skills like aided language input, right? Or having an engaging style of communicating with learners where you're not, putting them on the spot all the time. Get comfortable with that before you have to manage, teaching somebody else how to do it.
Just out of curiosity, really, pedagogically in those courses, do you teach specific like apps or language systems at all, or is it theory of execution more?
It's so funny that you ask that, because I've been involved in education in AAC, since my graduate days at Purdue. We used to have these think tanks, and it was always a kind of a debate among these professionals. And those were the days where there were really, really interesting think tank kinds of things happening. So Lyle Lloyd would bring the top names in the country to the table, and they would read papers and debate them. And then all of us grad students kind of sat around the perimeter, kind of having a peek into this, but also able to participate a bit. And so one of the points of discussion is, there was a camp that felt, no, we should not teach the specifics of technology for a lot of reasons. One being that our time with them is so limited and there are many more important things to learn. And then secondly, that the technology changes so rapidly. And then another camp believing that, yes, we should absolutely do it, because what good is the theory if they don't have the practical elements of how to implement it? And I kind of fell squarely down the middle, being a consensus type person. And so I never spent time teaching them to program and things like that. I see our role in AAC pre-service education with technology is to help them know the possibilities, help them understand the range of what's out there and the process of how to make good decisions about, goodness of fit, who's a good candidate for this feature or that feature, what kinds of things do you look for? So the way that we do our required AAC courses now, of course, there's all this terrific information available on the internet. There's no sense them learning that stuff from me. I'm not an expert in XYZ device or ABC app. So, what we do is we send them there. We hold their feet to the fire a little bit and make sure they do a range of those so that they see a variety of technologies for different clinical populations. We give them a context for it by giving them a hypothetical client scenario. And then after they've done all of this viewing of these different webinars, then they have some tasks trying to identify the appropriate hardware and software for their hypothetical client and what kinds of things they have to do to kind of customize it to make it a good fit for that individual. So I think, I love to see those AAC courses that expose people to technology, so giving them some hands-on. I think that's also important, not just to demystify it, but for them to really get how hard it is, right? We I think, lose sight of how much we're asking of our AAC client in any given moment. This stuff is hard, right? And, if you haven't tried using eye gaze or navigating through multiple screens to find the words that you want, chances are that you're going to have an unrealistic expectation of what's appropriate for your AAC learner, right? So I think, giving them some hands-on experiences where possible to demystify it, to help them understand what this experience is really like, but most importantly, letting them know that there's a wide range of this technology. There's nobody who's to anything to use it if it seems like it is appropriate, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I'm not saying technology for everybody, right? And that there's all this wonderful resources out there for you to get more information when you're ready.
Amen to everything you just said. Although you just gave me the image of having a student write their final term paper with Dasher with an eye gaze device. And for those of you who are listening, this is an older system that makes people a little ill sometimes. But I love that idea. I think that's great. And that's a very good mixture of theory and practice, because it's true. I had an AAC course, and we actually had my professor on the show at one point, and it was focused very much on theory. And I do rather wish that we had a little bit more exposure to the actual apps and devices. But some of that I think is almost hard to get access to in the classroom without inviting a bunch of vendor influence, if that makes any sense. Like I know some schools that will have vendors come in to present, and that always worries me.
You know what? I hear what you're saying, Lucas. But the reality is in our field, no speech language pathologist is going to be able to do this job without having good relationships with vendors. So from my perspective, it gives me the opportunity to model that for them. As the lead instructor for the course, one of the things I put in early on was a whole module on ethics in AAC. Anytime there's money in a field, right? Follow the money, right? We have to know what to do around this, right? So yes, there's potential for conflict of interest, for unethical things, but our students aren't born knowing this stuff. That you have to teach them how to do it because they are very afraid of anything that has a commercial sort of side to it. So, we try to work through the pedagogy. What's okay? What's not okay? Where do the roles break down? It's confusing to them because in our field, there are SLPs who are vendors, right? So do they follow the ASHA Code of Ethics or do they not? It's sticky. I think bringing in vendors gives me the opportunity to model for them.
That's great. The image I had in mind was this dystopian one where it's the teacher's never teaching and it's just a vendor every day coming in sort of thing. But you gave me a totally different perspective. So thank you.
I think another thing you mentioned about practicing what you preach is that I think they bet you a lot of pre-service SLPs are like, I just can't wait to graduate and get a job. Right. And then when they get a job, they think the learning stops. I've done all my learning because I paid for that. We learn every day. We learn every week. We got to be an active learner about the new stuff that's coming out and the new research.
Yep. I totally agree with that, Chris. And, that one of my favorite quotes is, those who dare to teach dare not cease to learn. It's just, it's just part of the job. You got to do it whether, for me, it's easy because it's a natural inclination, but I do have colleagues for whom it is not. Many of them are really good about putting themselves out there anyway. We have to do hard things, don't we?
Carole, do you have any suggestions for how to inspire, clinicians to kind of keep at the research and keep learning, and any tricks that you have? Because like you said, some people are just natural, they're naturally inclined to want to learn and they're curious. But other people's, I think maybe it doesn't come as naturally. So is there anything that you can suggest that for those people where it doesn't come quite as naturally?
Well, one of the things that I do, Rachel, is when my students have the opportunity to go to a conference, we're really lucky here in South Florida. It's only a 3-hour drive up to Orlando, where ATIA is every winter, or we had ASHA in Miami a couple of years ago. I have online students who are all around the country. Some of them are going to be in Boston, So one of the things that I sometimes do with them is I'll guide them through the program a little. And, because it's so overwhelming when you go to a conference for the first time, you and 12,000 of your best friends,
Exactly.
So one of the tricks that I found to be really helpful, Rachel, is to tell them what speakers to look for, right? Mm-hmm. So there's two ways to approach this. You could go in a content area that you're super interested in or that's new. But I find for the beginners, if it's not a really engaging speaker, right, then I may have won the battle, but I've lost the war. So I want them to see Gal Van Tatenhove, right? I want them to see Caroline Musselwhite. I want them to see these people who can't not do this with love, passion, and enthusiasm. These are people I trust to provide research-supported strategies and work that into their presentation. But it's very different than going to a technical session, right, where they are giving you the background, they're telling you the research questions and the independent variable and the dependent variable. That's more of an acquired taste, right? And honestly, I'm a little disappointed about the research direction our field is going in. So I'm okay with that on a couple of different levels. But to me, the most important thing is to help them realize that in the beginning, that you can do professional development. It doesn't hurt.
Exactly.
It's not grad school, right?
Yes.
There are no more tests and papers, right? So go to people that you find like you just really enjoy the heck out of listening to them, right? You're going to be, God willing, you're going to be in this career for an awful long time. And so the last thing I want to do is overwhelm you and burn you out so that we lose your good heart and all of the education and the investment, and have you go to do something else.
Right.
Absolutely.
I don't know. That's the approach I've taken, Rachel. It's not very scientific, though.
No, but I think you touched on such great points. First of all, I think grad students sometimes are traumatized from grad school. So, we don't want to say, oh, keep learning, because right now learning might be a traumatic event.
Exactly.
But I think that you're exactly right. There has to be some element of inspiration. And I think those great speakers that you mentioned, that's what all of their presentations incorporate. Obviously, they have some technical things and some research and some guidelines, but you walk away from those presentations inspired. And I think that's such an important thing when you're kind of just getting your feet wet with professional development, is you want to have that feeling of, a breath of fresh air. I can go back to my therapy and be inspired to do something a little different or to see things through a different lens.
One of the best pieces of advice that a grad teacher ever gave me was that on that Sunday night when you have that 4 hours free, in the middle of your second practicum, don't feel like you have to read Dostoevsky, but go pick up Harry Potter, right? Even though you're a grad student, it doesn't have to be highbrow all the time. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about one thing that you mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, and which was the comment about the direction of research in our field. And I just recently heard someone say something along the lines of how in a lot of fields there's EBP, but in AAC there's PBE, right? Practice-based evidence. And I'm curious how you feel about that.
I think my comment earlier, I probably shouldn't have said anything, but it's true. I am a little disappointed and concerned about the state of AAC research, at least the studies that make it to refereed publication, right? And I think my primary concern, I have a couple concerns, but one of the main ones is that it's very much at the micro level, right? And of course there are exceptions, but for the most part, it feels really disconnected from the real lives of real people who have AAC needs, and even more disconnected from the SLPs who serve them. So the research that I get most excited about is the stuff that, happens in everyday settings. It is a little bit more scalable than some of the things that are out there. And I think it is a little bit more reflective of the kinds of practice settings in which we work. I get that it's all important, right? But I would have thought that we would have been further along by now.
What do you think the obstacle is?
I think a big piece of it is funding. And, for many years, I was involved in the ASHA's AAC division. Now, they were SIDS at the time. And one of the things that I was really pushing for when I had the opportunity, being in those roles of steering committee chair for the AAC division gives you kind of the ear of some ASHA folks that you wouldn't ordinarily have just as an ASHA member. And one of the things I really pushed hard for was for their arm that deals with governance and public policy and things like that, trying to get on their agenda that they must push for more funding for doctoral level research in AAC. Those monies have dried up in a lot of ways, and they tend to go to the same programs, competition cycle after competition cycle. And that's problematic because we've had a chronic shortage of doctoral level SLPs for decades, right? So if there's a general shortage of SLP doctoral folks, there's a shortage in AAC, right? And we're never going to solve this problem if we keep shortchanging the funding for doctoral education. The economy is very different than when I started college in 1977. You guys know this. You could work in the summer and have a part-time job through college, and you graduated maybe with a little debt, but nothing like what students are facing now. Economically, it's impossible And we are losing such talented minds and clinicians. So folks, let's wake up. And I'd love to see us light some more candles, put more funding at the federal level into this. And I think it's something that every discipline within speech language pathology, whether it's swallowing or literacy or voice, right? I'm saying invest in doctoral funding for speech language pathology. If you do that, the rest will take care of itself.
So, Carole, can I jump in here with a thought? And that is maybe speech language pathologists traditionally are the ones who own AAC. And I wonder if that's not changing or if it should be. Meaning, could we get to a greater pool of doctorate candidates if we were thinking of other disciplines that were working in AAC? Teachers are going to be working with AAC even more, or just as much as a speech language pathologist. So could we get them doing research in that avenue? What do you think?
Chris, I couldn't agree more. The problem is the same, though, and that's the shame in all of it, right? The doctoral funding for a teacher isn't any better than it is for an SLP. If I want funding for a doctoral program at my university, I can pull from education DOE funds, and I can also pull from medical funds to fund that doctoral program. Teachers don't have that luxury. All of the funding for those doctoral programs in their graduate work has to come more from the DOE line. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so.
Conceptually, it's a great idea. And I'm happy, if people are going to put more funding into, doctoral education for educators, I'm all over that. And that's the model I was trained in. Actually, my doctorate is not in speech pathology, right? My doctorate is in special education. Right? I say I'm a collaborator. Some people said I'm a traitor, but I didn't want to take my elective courses in fluency. I didn't want to take them in voice. It's God bless the people who do, but I wanted to understand, how do you teach people with severe intellectual disabilities? What is the process of motor learning? What is the history behind all of this? Those are the things I really felt I needed to know more about when I was a doctoral student and a relatively new speech language pathologist. But I'm all about, wherever we can put this funding, I think we should do it. But we need to invest in doctoral level funding, because that's the way the research base is going to grow. And we need more of it, and we need broader perspectives.
It's like so rare that we're dumbstruck, all of us. I completely, I can't agree more. There was a post that I saw in one of the Facebook groups that's associated with us, where somebody was making a call to action for more PhDs, and every single comment was, okay, sure, fund me, or all right, feed my family and I'll do it. Right. And that's unfortunately what it's become. And then we have the potential introduction of a clinical doctorate piece. I'm not sure that's going to answer the research question so much.
No, I agree. I think both are really good things to have, but they do kind of address, different things. If we could grow both of those, that would be a perfect storm, because then we'd have better research, because the doctoral level clinician is going to be better prepared to work with folks who want a research career and be able to pull in the practicing professionals, whether they're OTs or teachers, families, people who use AAC. All of these folks can be part of research teams, and they are in a lot of places. We're just not set up to do enough of that.
So if I'm listening to this right now and I think, okay, I'm hearing this call to action to try and drum up more financial support for doctorate programs, what do I actually do? What action can I take?
Good question. So generally in the summer, I want to say maybe late July, August, ASHA's, I'm forgetting the acronym for it, but it has to do with their Government Relations and Public Policy Committee. They put out kind of a call for input. Right. And so any member, and probably any non-member as well, can go onto that site and say, here's what I think should be on our legislative platform. And so people from any area can put things on there. So you can go in and say, we need more funding for doctoral level speech language pathologists and related disciplines, both so that we have better research, so that we have better clinical education, and so that we have better clinical services across the different domain areas. So that's the first thing that I thought of, Chris.
Just to clarify there, could students do that?
Absolutely.
they wouldn't be ASHA members yet, but like you said, maybe it's not just ASHA members that can participate.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, sometimes depending on how the semester's going and all of that, some of my grad students have gotten extra credit for that sort of thing. Well, because I always tell them, one of the biggest shocks to me as a new clinician was how much time that I spent in things like advocacy, right? And things like that are not like specific client services, right? Right? You guys know what this is like. It was just like so stunning to me how much time out of my week was things that really wasn't the client sitting across from me. And so, we try to look at advocacy, from those concentric circles, first for yourself and your client, but then also moving out for, your region and then for your profession.
It's too bad because it's disheartening, but at the same time, what gives me a lot of hope and happiness is like going back to thinking about that conversation I saw online. There were like 70 people that replied right away saying, yes, I'd love to get a PhD. And isn't that cool to work in a profession where that many people are motivated and engaged that much?
It's phenomenal, Lucas. And, one of the reasons I'm so excited about things like what you guys are doing and people who do blogs and, the wonderful work the Informed SLP is doing, like all of that, is that there's a million ways to learn. There's a million ways to get better at what you do. And, I have probably a dozen calls a year where people come to me saying, I'm thinking about getting my doctorate. Should I go back? Should I not? We have these conversations. One of the things I say is, what do you want to do with it? Like, seriously, think about your goals, because if you don't need it, there's much better ways to learn about AAC, to learn about research than doing your doctorate. There's a lot of wonderful things you'll get taking that path, but it's not the only way. Right. So if you know what you want your outcomes to be, let's start with that and work backwards. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, I think so. That's a great plan with the end in mind. Where are you going? And I think we always ask, what problem do you want to solve?
And also to remember that a doctorate from a research standpoint, that's the entry level degree, right? This is not it's that feeling of, I'm done. I don't have to learn anymore, Chris, like you had sort of alluded to, but there's still plenty to do after that point. You made a comment that when you were in school that I guess the breadth of our scope of practice was narrower, right? That we didn't have so much of the swallowing piece in these things. Do you think that we're too broad and shallow, and should we have something like an AAC certification through a STIG, especially with looking at things like RESNA and ATPs and other fields that are coming in, or should people just be pursuing those certifications in addition?
I've been following this discussion because I've been involved in it, for a couple decades now through ASHA, and I think it is appropriate to keep the master's level in speech language pathology kind of a generalist degree, the way that it is now. So you're sampling a lot of different things. And, a lot of people who are not in academia are surprised when they hear that ASHA or CAA, who accredits the programs for speech language pathology at the master's level, they don't tell graduate programs what courses they have to offer. Right? They say you must graduate students with these competencies. Right? Tell us how you're going to do that. And then they evaluate us as programs on our plan for that and then our execution for that. Of course, we're thrilled that it includes AAC, and I think AAC can be more robust at the master's level, no doubt about it. But I'm not one who favors splitting up the master's into a lot of tracks. I kind of like everybody being together because, God willing, we'll live long, healthy lives, and we may make different decisions in our careers. But following that, once you are a practicing clinician, and your feet are on the ground, you've made your first dozen loan payments, you've caught your breath. At that point, absolutely there is room and a need for additional information. I do think it is timely to pursue a specialty recognition at the postmaster's level for our professionals. Can I put a however in?
Yes, although I was agreeing so much. What's the however? Uh-oh.
I would love the however to be, but I would love to make this interdisciplinary.
Okay, I agree with the however.
Yes.
I'm into that. All right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would love that specialization to be spearheaded from an organization like USAC. You could come to the AAC sort of playground from lots of different directions, right? And maybe we look at prerequisite to your knowledge base and letting you know, here are the kinds of things you need to be able to know and demonstrate before you enter into this, right? But get there however you want to get there. And then from this point, we're going to work together to learn all these other things. So I love the idea of specialization. I'll go with the ASHA stuff because that's what it is. It comes out of ASHA and it comes to the center of the world more where we can contribute from different professions and from different cultures.
Let's just end the podcast right there.
I know. Well, I like how you brought up the different cultures piece too, because I mean, we personally as a group have gotten asked by Pakistan, by India, by people saying, how can we put something together to certify people in AAC? I actually, it's funny. I think maybe 5 years ago, I probably emailed you about this at some point because I think you might have still been involved. But it's tough for I think a lot of us, and we've had this conversation before, because on the one hand, I want to make sure that that people are getting the education, like, for example, in AAC, the way that they should be. But I also don't want people to get so hyper specific that they lose all of that other breadth of knowledge. Like I was trained to do an MBS. Would I do a swallow study today? No,
I'm with you on that. As a matter of fact, one of the things I do every year is I participate, with our grad students when we do screenings, at different like Head Start or preschool or whatever, because it sort of helps ground me like what normal is, like how miraculous language is when it develops unimpeded, right? And the other thing I do is, we were talking about strategies for going to conferences. I'll often kind of identify a topic where I want to go back to my roots. And so I'll make this, language learning disabilities conference, and I'll go to a couple presentations along those threads. But I like to think of it not specialty training, but advanced training. For years, I had a postmaster's specialization in AAC that I ran online. And, like a lot of things, it just got I bit off a little more than I could chew. And I couldn't sustain it for a terribly long period of time. But it was really wonderful. And I had that same opportunity when I was at Purdue and of doing it across the disciplines. And it was just such an enriching, experience for the instructor, let alone the students.
Carole, you spoke about kind of we've spoke a lot about continuing education and learning. You mentioned, being able to go to blogs, and I would love, since we have the opportunity to hear, you talk, and for you to just tell us about Praactical AAC, which is... That's
what I was going to ask about.
Of course, it's the burning question we've all been wanting to ask, Carole.
Sure.
So I'd love to just hear about your experience and how it came to fruition and why you started it. And I mean, it's grown so substantially. It's so cool to see.
Well, it certainly has been a labor of love. And I started it with my friend and colleague, Robin Parker, who passed away in 2014. She was, at Nova Southeastern University as a clinical educator. She has an amazing background in autism and taught me so much. And so we were always kindred spirits in terms of, our standards for clinical education and direct services, our approach to things. And so we began doing a lot more clinical services and clinical education together in autism and in AAC. And so we would do things like run group supervision meetings for our graduate student clinicians who had AAC clients. We would do communication support teams where when our bosses weren't looking, we would push out and go into public schools or into, preschools and do classroom-based AAC with a bunch of grad students. Shh, don't tell. Like we would do all these kinds of sneaky things and not sneaky things too. But a lot of what happened was we were saying the same things over and over and over again to new crops of families in the clinic, to new graduate students who were in our offices and in our classes. And there were two negatives about that, but there were two parts of it that were problematic for me. One is I have a terrible memory. Right? So sometimes, like if you'd catch me on a good day when I'm properly caffeinated, I'll remember to tell you everything and all the good stories along with it that will allow you to remember it. But the other 364 days of the year, you're only going to get a teeny piece of me. And it won't be until I'm stuck in turnpike traffic that I remember the 99 other things that were essential for me to tell you that I completely missed the boat on. So that was a problem for me. The other problem was by not getting then the opportunity to do AAC 201, 301, 901. Like we were so hungry to get into the more nuanced stuff. But when you're revisiting the basics over and over and over again, you don't have time for that other stuff. So we decided we were going to write the blog that we wish was around when we were beginning clinicians. And we were going to do it in such a way that we were both big believers in working smart. I don't want to ever do anything that I can only use for one purpose. So we wanted to be able to use it with our clinic patients, right? I wanted to be able to say to a mom who's sitting next to me in this therapy session, learning how to use aided language input for her 19-year-old son with significant intellectual disability and autism, right? I want to be able to send her a link to a blog post that shows a video of it. I wanted to be able to put in my classes, like, here are the kinds of things to do before you come to class this week. Go read this post, go watch this video, because that's what we're going to talk about the first 15 minutes of class. Like, let's flip it a little bit, right? So it was a huge emotional risk for both of us.
Yeah, for us to, it took a lot of talking to ourselves and to each other to get the courage to put ourselves out there, not just in the professional sense, but just like, as somebody who is, really, kind of like, it was just a real challenge. But the good news is the world is now really more accepting of different, of different approaches to things.
And, in 2011, we started our blog. We made a commitment to doing a lot of blogging. Like most people, when they do this, they'll post once a week, but we decided we are going to just open the floodgates, right? And we're going to put lots and lots of content out there because we just had lots to say, and we needed this stuff for the clinical work that we did and for the educational work that we did. So we were blogging practically every day for the first couple of years. There are blog posts 5 days out of 7 now. So that was our intention.
Well, Carole, something I remember you saying maybe when I first met you was that you never thought of the Praactical AAC as your blog, meaning that it was more for the community and that other people would be invited to do guest blog posts. Is that still the case? You think of it that way?
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've really tried to, that was really part of our belief system going in, is that in our profession, we have a huge fear of not being perfect. And we're afraid to share because we're afraid of judgment, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm the poster girl for that one, right? And so that when I say it was an emotional risk, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. You can't put the amount of content we've put out there on the blog if you're worried about being perfect. It's just, there's just not enough hours in the day, even if I quit my job. But absolutely, I see it as a community. And you know what? There's a lot of crappy AAC stuff out there on social media. Let me just put that out there, right? There's a lot of people. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, right? So there are risks to all of this. But having said that, I think we do more harm to ourselves by self-censorship than we do by putting things out there that aren't quite right. So we're going to mess up one way or another. And we made the decision to choose to mess up with open hearts and saying, yeah, we're not perfect. You got me. But we're going to put ourselves out there and we're going to try to validate other people like us who are willing to take that risk.
That is a huge thing right now in just public education, teaching kids, is this idea of failing forward. Go ahead and put yourself out there and go ahead and make a mistake. And it's okay to make those mistakes and then learn from them. And I also like what what you're saying is kind of lead with sharing, that we're a community. It's not just you're not doing this by yourself in your own little closet in your speech therapy room. You're a part of a larger community. So share what you're learning and people want to learn from you, and just lead with that mentality, not being scared.
You've been such a force for good in our profession about that, Chris. You're talking about the obligation to share has really given me courage, and I know gave Robin courage as well. The reality is, particularly when we first started this, remember, we were conceptualizing it in 2010. We created it in 2011. Not a popular thing for an academic to do, but from the academic community, they were the slowest to come on board. And, look, I'm used to that because I work at a non-traditional university. I teach AAC online, for heaven's sakes. It happens to be my favorite way of teaching, period. But a lot of people will argue until the cows come home that it's just not an appropriate thing to do. But, this is an area where the conversation has changed. In public education now, it's all about growth mindset. Let's depathologize mistakes and make an accepted part of the learning process and all of that. But it just was not so for a very long time.
One of the wonderful things about sharing all the time, too, is that then you also get corrected. There's been plenty of times when I'm just sure I'm right about something and then I talk about it. And this just happened actually recently with an interview that we did. I did something for USSAAC and opened my mouth and stuck my foot, I think, all the way through my body and learned about it the hard way. And you know what? Now I'm a better clinician for it. So thank you for that. So I just thank you. Thank you to all of you people. Thank you to everyone. Hugs all around. Listeners, hug yourself. If you're alone, give a little hug. If you're with a neighbor, hug your neighbor. I'm curious to just if you could see any one question answered in the next 5 years, like what are the burning questions in our field from a research standpoint?
Well, I think we need a huge investment in implementation science. I think in our profession, we just don't have a good understanding of how to scale up interventions that work. Then we've got the bigger problem, in my opinion, of how to get everybody doing those things, right? In every clinical service area, there's a research to practice gap, right? That's nothing unique to AAC or to speech language pathology for that matter, right? So I would like to see, more on that sort of implementation science, not so much a burning question of how best to teach AAC users. There is that, but what's really keeping me awake more is how do we get more people doing things that are acceptable practices? We got a long ways to go. We just want to get everybody providing the minimum. So let's do our agreements, right? Here are the kinds of things we do and do not do in this profession in different service delivery settings with different clinical populations. And how can we get a greater percentage of practicing professionals up to that minimal bar? From there, we can take those next steps. And I'm so happy that people are talking about best practices, but I'm also a pragmatist. So I'd love to see us really dive deep into implementation science. It's something that is not domain specific.
Well, and that's a very 50,000 foot high view, right? That what I'm hearing you say correctly is that the building the skills or teaching the skills to be a good clinician, to give good implementation is maybe more foundational than the questions of iconicity and, or whatever else we might talk about in research. Not that those aren't important. Am I understanding that right?
I think so, Lucas. I think a lot of it too for me is we don't know everything, but we know enough. We know enough to do better than we're doing. If you think about the average person out there who has AAC needs and then backtrack and think, well, what has their AAC journey been like? We certainly know more than what they've been able to take advantage of. I guess that's my point. Let's get the stuff that we know now, let's get people doing that. What's the science behind scaling that up?
Well, I wonder about living my own little bubble, right? So I think that more people now today know about core vocabulary. Let's just pick that one than ever before. Have we reached it where everyone knows about it? Like most people, yeah, they've heard core vocabulary. Or is we still, do you feel like, no, Chris, you're just in your bubble where everyone you talk to knows about core vocabulary?
I mean, it certainly has reached that tipping point where lots and lots of people do. Lots of people have misinformation about it as well. They have a misconception that it is developmental, for example, like, oh, these are the order of words that we should be teaching. Like for beginning communicators, teach these, words, right? No. Core vocabulary is a mathematical construct, right? It's a frequency count. How often do people say things, right? And it's largely based on speaking people. So it should inform what we do, right? I'd rather have people doing it a little wrong than not doing it at all, and I have heated discussions with people who vehemently disagree with me. And that's fine too. We should have these discussions. But I think, particularly, some of the folks that I interact with that have more of a behavioral background, we have these kinds of conversations. And I kind of think of it, for want of a better word, as sort of like an inelegant form of shaping. Right? Like, I cannot shape behavior that doesn't exist.
Right.
Right? If you're doing it, I can help you do it a little better. Right? But if you're not doing it, there's nothing for me, So what the wave of core vocabulary has done is much like what the wave of mobile technology has done for AAC, right? It's taken it mainstream. And there are problems with that, to be sure. But the problems that are associated with that approach are smaller problems than the problems that we had up until that point, which was severely restricted access. You think it's bad now, rewind to 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, that's like arguing that because humanity developed agriculture and more people choke now, that agriculture is bad. Well, there's one question we almost always ask at the end. I think Rachel's the best one.
Carole, if you had a billboard that every SLP saw, what would it say?
Oh my goodness, a billboard?
Mm-hmm.
I think it would say this, Rachel: be gentle. Be gentle with yourself. We expect so much of ourselves. We are so self-critical. We censor ourselves so much. Be gentle with others. My SLP students often very, very frustrated, for example, when they go in and they try to help a teacher implement something and then they go back and it's not implemented. Like, be gentle with your colleagues. Be gentle with the field. We are a slow-moving group. So I think that would be my billboard: be gentle.
I love that. And I think it touches on, I love that you touched on the kind of self-love and compassion, because I think SLPs tend to be very, type A and perfectionist, and we think we have to have it exactly right. And, we're all learning and trying the best that we can. So it's such an important reminder to just be gentle with ourselves. So I love that.
Well, and I love the idea of being gentle with your colleagues and the people you're working with, because I can definitely attest to points where I wasn't, where I'd come in like, we have to change all of this. And I came in like a bulldozer, that never works. No one wants to change that way, but a more gentle approach, you catch more flies with honey, right? You have that approach with people, you do better.
Well, I can't even begin to tell you what a pleasure this has been. Thank you so much for joining us, Carole Zangari, once again. For those of you listening out there, as always, please check out our show notes, which you can find on iTunes or at tech.speechscience.org. We will have links there to Praactical AAC and other work of Carole's, although it hardly seems necessary because it's so ubiquitous in our field. But I feel personally enriched by this conversation, and I thank you so much for your time. This has been Lucas Duber along with Chris Begay and Rachel Madel. We'll talk to you all next week.